small stream flowing through the Norfolk countryside. It's hard to believe that the upper reaches of the River Ant once provided the waters for a vital means of transporting goods across the county. Once capable of carrying 20-ton trading barges known as Norfolk wherries along its 9-mile length, today the North Walsham Dilham Canal is a far cry from the days when these black-sailed traders were a familiar sight on Norfolk's waterways. Now choked up and without water for some of its length, nature has gradually reclaimed this important part of Norfolk's heritage, which is officially accepted as the only locked canal in the county. Ensuring that this historic waterway doesn't deteriorate completely, the North Walsham Dilham Canal Trust was formed, which aims to work with the canal proprietors and adjacent landowners to protect, conserve and improve the route of the canal for the benefit of both the environment and the local community. Formed in 2008, the Trust works with the East Anglian Waterways Association, jointly organising regular work parties in order to help protect the canal from further deterioration. Joining us from the East Anglian Waterways Association is archivist Ivan Kane, who tells us more about this historic waterway.
In about 1812, most of the coal for the North Walsham area came down from the northeast of the country, was unloaded onto the beach and then carried by cart across the North Walsham, or it came down to Yarmouth and came up by wherry to Dilham Staithe and was carried by Mr. Isaacs in his horse and cart up to North Walsham. So in 1812 they decided they wanted a cheaper form of transport, and they decided to put forward the idea of building a canal from Dilham up to and past North Walsham to Antrim Ponds.
But the coal traffic never materialised, remaining cheaper to transport by road. Instead, the canal was used to transport agricultural goods such as manure and animal feeds, as well as serving the many mills along its length. There was also a weekly cabbage wherry, which carried cargoes bound for Great Yarmouth Market. The canal starts to the north of Walsham Bridge, on the edge of the Norfolk Broads. For the first 2 miles, the canal is tidally influenced and still accessible by small watercraft.
At one time there were mileposts every quarter of a mile along this canal. At the moment we only know of 2 still in place. This is one of them, which is half a mile from the Smallbrook River, and the other one is just below Honing Bridge.
Canoes are regularly seen navigating this stretch, and when the water is high, an occasional small motorboat may be seen passing through Tunbridge Bridge, heading upstream towards the canal's first lock at Honing.
The canal has 6 locks, or was built with 6 locks. This is the lowest lock of Honing, or Dilham Lock as it was originally called, because just beside here was Dilham Mill, and just above the lock to the left was Dilham Lake and Dilham Broad, which was a mill pond for Dilham. And the wherries would come through and could sail round to the top of the mill. Honing Lock is the bottom lock, and it's the lock where the tidal section meets the main canal. So from here down towards the river, the Smallbrook River, is actually tidally influenced, and the water levels can change by up to 2 foot at a time depending on the state of the tide.
A short distance north of the lock, a staithe was constructed to serve Honing village, but in the late 19th century, competition arrived when the railways came to Norfolk.
This is Honing Staithe Cut, and this was where the wherries would have come to service the villages of Honing and local farms. In 1881, the railway line cut through, probably truncating the top of the canal, and you've got the railway bridge behind, very fine railway bridge. The staithe was still used, and therefore there was a track across, a level crossing, and then a track up to Honing village. This part of the canal was completely overgrown until work parties just discovered it in about 2005-2006, and since then it's been dug out and a canal walk has been made here so that people can come off Weaver's Way, walk around down to the canal and then round through the woods back to Weaver's Way.
The Weaver's Way footpath follows the course of the former railway line, which ran alongside the canal to the small hamlet of Briquette, where the canal reaches its second lock.
This canal, when it was built, was actually a very late canal for the canal era. In 1826, people were almost starting to think about railways. Therefore, it was actually technically quite an advanced canal. And it's very unusual, and on the lock gates you'll see that the beams are actually made of metal and not made of wood. The lock was operated at the bottom by opening paddles on the bottom gates, and the paddle gear here is exactly the same as you'll find anywhere else in the Midlands of this country. Fairly normal, traditional, although it was made by Cubitt and Walker. The lock was probably last used about 1936, and at the top, on the right hand side, the walls have been very much undermined, which is why that area is completely closed off, and there are some telegraph poles down by the bridge here, the use of which is to prop up that wall with the hope of eventually rebuilding it.
Briquette was once home to a thriving water mill, which predates the canal itself. The mill has a colourful history spanning over 2 centuries before closing in 1969, when owners Cubitt and Walker moved the milling activities further upstream to Bridge. Just 6 years later, Briquette Mill was burnt down by its new owners, who were found to be linked with the notorious Cray twins as part of an insurance scam, leaving behind the ruinous structure seen today.
This is the infamous Briquette Mill. There were 2 buildings here, the front building, which was brick for the first storey, and then corrugated iron, probably wood previously, for the next 2 or 3 storeys. Behind it there was a fully brick building, which was the granary from where the wherries would have been loaded. This went out of use many years ago, but in the 1970s some people from London bought the whole plot and plans were put forward to change them into flats. However, overnight in August 1975, both the front mill and the granary had separate fires and later ended up being shown to be arson. And the whole point of burning down these mills was for the owners to claim on the insurance. It was one of several insurance scams that they were carrying out throughout the country at the time.
The charred remains of the former granary stood untouched until October 2012, when the building was finally demolished after being declared structurally unsafe following a survey carried out by North Norfolk District Council. Nearby, volunteers of the North Walsham Dilham Canal Trust have been tackling the choked-up former mill pond.
This is Briquette Mill Pond, and this is where the wherries used to come to unload, not for the mill, because they would have unloaded below the lock at the granary itself, but this is where wherries would have unloaded for the village of Worcester. And also built here was a coal shed, which was built of wood in a position where the pillbox is behind us. When the pillbox was built, allegedly it was built within the coal shed, so the coal shed was used to disguise it. It's been very overgrown over the years, but when the mill pond was cleared out about 3 or 4 years ago, the owners of this particular section of the canal, North Walsham Canal Company, asked us also to take all the vegetation off the pillbox so it could be seen in its full glory.
This pillbox was one of a number of pillboxes which can be seen at various points along the canal, which was heavily defended as part of a stop line during both the First and Second World Wars. The locks and bridges were mined and parts of the canal were deepened as an attempt to stop mobile troops advancing inland should the enemy have landed on our shores. At Bridge, the canal reaches its 3rd lock, overshadowed by the imposing remains of Bridge Mill, which lie derelict since its closure in 1998. When after almost 130 years, owners Cubitt and Walker sold the mill to local rivals Duffields, who subsequently closed it down. In recent years, the mill has become an eyesore. However, some new owners have recently taken it over, and planned to convert the mill into holiday and residential accommodation. Meanwhile, Ebridge Mill Pond has recently been returned to its former glory after gradually silting up over the years.
This part of the canal gradually got reeded up in the 1990s, 2000s and completely silted over. But in 2009, the old canal company took over the canal and bought this stretch from here up to Swayfield, and one of their earliest tasks was to buy this dredger, ex-British Waterways Weasel, and put it on here, and this was used to help desilt the mill pond and to clear through up towards Spa Common. Unfortunately, the Environment Agency preferred this length to be left in its silted up state, and this did lead to problems between the two over the years. But this area is now well used by the local people, dog walking, sitting on the benches and just admiring the scenery and enjoying the wildlife.
Heading north from Ebridge, the canal reaches the quiet village of Spa Common, which was once home to a busy Staith serving the nearby market town of North Walsham.
It's very difficult to see this as it was. This was at one time, at Spa Common, Staith, one of the main places where the wherries unloaded for North Walsham. It was from here that the wherries came up, unloaded, and then was taken by cart to North Walsham. It's also the closest the canal really ever got to North Walsham, despite its name.
A short distance upstream from the Staith is the canal's fourth lock, which has undergone major restoration work.
We're now at Bacton Wood Lock, which has over the last 3 years been completely reconstructed by the old canal company, just by two people, one working as labourer and the other retired brickie, and they put about 50,000 bricks in here. The lock gates have been rebuilt using old groins. It's been taken down from Cromer Beach, and again they've been completely handmade in a workshop that they built here at Bacton Wood Mill.
While the lock is still awaiting a new set of bottom gates, the upper gates are fully operational.
What you can see here, where the lock's been reconstructed, is the sill, and at the bottom of the sill, Millington's design of wood going across, so when the gate shuts, it will actually lock against that beam and become more watertight.
The original paddle gear has also been refurbished.
This is the original paddle gear that's been rescued, shot blasted and replaced, built by G. Cubitt of North Walsham in the 1820s. This is a ground paddle, and the whole idea here was that you put your windlass on to the lock, turned it round, which would lift the paddle at the bottom. The water would then go underneath where we're standing, come out into the lock and fill the lock so that a wherry could go in, and then by opening up the paddles in the bottom gates, lower down and make its way down towards Yarmouth.
Above the lock was one of 5 dry docks originally situated along the canal.
This is the only evidence of the 5 dry docks that were once on this canal. The dry docks were particularly used for converting wherries into pleasure wherries, because some of the first pleasure boats on the Norfolk Broads actually started on this canal.
Adjacent to the dry dock was the mill pond for Bacton Wood Mill.
This is Bacton Wood Mill and the headquarters of the old canal company. This is the mill that has been restored inside, just waiting for the water to come back onto its mill pond here on our left.
Above Bacton Wood Lock, the canal has completely dried up, but just over 100 years ago it was a completely different situation when the canal burst its banks here during the floods of 1912.
This is the approximate site of the 1912 breach, following 7 inches of rain falling on one day in August. It was the same flood that caused a lot of havoc in Norwich and completely washed out the Aylsham navigation. But the breach was through the bank, in that direction, down into the valley below.
The dry section of the canal continues as far as Royston Bridge, which was completely rebuilt during the 1960s to accommodate heavy construction traffic en route to the site of a new gas terminal at Bacton. During this time, the water was diverted in order for the workers to carry out the construction of the bridge.
This is where the canal was diverted in order to enable the bridge works to be undertaken under dry conditions, and this is where the problem is now, because all the water coming down the canal is diverted from the canal under this bridge, which is the original canal bank, into the soak dike at the side. Then it continues down the left hand side, then goes underneath the canal in a culvert, and then into the old River Ant on the right hand side to come back out below Briquette Mill. This is the bit that's got to be a sluice or some construction built here at some time to enable the canal to be rewatered.
Overlooking Royston Bridge is the former Wherry Inn.
This was one of the main pubs on the canal, and the lady who lives here now, her grandfather was once the publican, but when he finished, because the law wouldn't allow his wife to take the licence over, that's when the pub closed. But for many years this was a major place where people would come for their refreshment, either from North Walsham or for the wherrymen on the canal itself. Quay heading has been replaced over the last 2 or 3 years with money from the East Anglian Waterways Association, and the aim here again is to return the water to this area so that the water can get down to the mill at Upton Wood.
North of Royston Bridge, the canal was crossed by the Norfolk and Suffolk Joint Railway before reaching the village of Swayfield, which celebrates its links with the canal by depicting a Norfolk wherry on its village sign. Like many other villages along the canal, Swayfield once had a staith serving the long demolished Swayfield Mill, which predates the canal itself.
We're now at Swayfield Staithe and Bridge. Bridge is unusual in that for 1826 it's a skew bridge. It's built on the skew, therefore the bricks underneath are at an angle. Also, because it wasn't right angles to the canal at this point, wherries coming around the corner chopped the edge of the bricks on the bridge, and you can see on the right hand side where the bricks have been knocked over the years.
In the late 19th century, the canal became disused above Swayfield, with wherries terminating at a turning point near the Staithe. The remainder of the canal was simply abandoned, including the final 2 locks, a short distance upstream of the bridge.
We're now at Swayfield Upper Lock. This part of the canal is owned by Mike Starling, so this is the 4th owner of the canal, and these locks, 2 locks, went out of use in about 1870, and above here the canal was filled in the early 1900s. One of the things the restoration people have found here is the possibility that this is the remains of one of the original lock gates, in which case it dates before 1870, so it's something for the archaeologists to investigate, hopefully later this year.
Up until recently, the lower lock was being eroded by tree roots and brambles. But in early 2013, volunteers from the North Walsham Dilham Canal Trust started clearing the site, exposing the historic brickwork hidden for years by Mother Nature. Here, the owners are intending to preserve the lock structures as historical artefacts within their nature reserve. From Swayfield, the canal continues north, passing under Bradfield Bridge before reaching its original terminus at Antingham, at the site of the former bone mills.
We're now at the site of Antingham Lower Bone Mill. The only remains are a few bricks on the other side. Behind those bricks once stood the Lower Antingham Mill for bone crushing. Behind it there was a large mill pond, and on that mill pond small lighters would have travelled down from the upper mill in order to bring goods down to here to transship across to the wherries that were in the canal here. This part of the canal was only used till about 1870s, because by that time the railway had come to North Walsham, and the phosphates that came up from the Yarmouth were then put onto carts and brought by road, and so the canal here went out of use about 1870s.
A short distance from the bone mills was the aptly named Barge Inn. Today, this former pub is now a private dwelling, still in the hands of the family who ran it until its closure in the 1960s.
Our wherries what travelled on there, they couldn't understand why this got the name of the barge. Well, they say what was happening along the coast was trading barges, and they think that's how this got the name. When I was born, I mean, my grandfather and grandmother was landlady, lord and landlady, and then 1937, when I was 5-year-old, my grandfather died, and there my grandmother took over the licence till 1951, and then my father took on from 1951 up to the time it closed. In the days of, when that was a pub, I mean, that was the bar in there, and this was what they call smoke room, anything where you like. But I seen this room full of people dancing with old squeeze box going, and I mean that was, and of course during the war we had a searchlight between just on the railway bridge. Well, where'd they go? In the pub. But this is what used to be the bar, and there was a seat, a wooden seat there to here, and another one there, and you walk through here with your beer from the cellar. Now this is the cellar. And you feel through that's where the barrels used to be. And through here we had what was the bottle there. In here. I remember this was our Narrated shelter during the war. I slept up that corner in the bed with my brothers. You see, the trapdoor was here, because they say they couldn't get a barrel, which was 36 gallons, down through that hole there. So they lowered it through this way, from that pulley.
And that concludes our journey along this historic canal. While much of the canal has been choked up after years of neglect, the regular work parties carried out by the Norfolk Uncovered Canal Trust are gradually making progress, with skiffs, sailing boats, canoes and other small craft having all been seen on the nearly cleared E-Bridge reach over the past year. However, there are still many obstacles to overcome. But even here, things are more optimistic, as regular meetings are now taking place between the Environment Agency and the Trust to look at ways forward. Additionally, local town, district and county councillors are supporting the restoration as they see the benefits there are for the community. It is hoped that in the future, people will once again be able to enjoy this stretch of waterway and the history that surrounds it.